Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Right in Front of My Face, the podcast talking about big things happening right in front of us. I'm your host, Shannon Hull, and I'd like to officially welcome you to Season 2. I'm incredibly proud to be sitting here in my basement announcing the next season of my humble little podcast, considering 1 year ago, I didn't even know what a podcast was. And all of a sudden, I feel like I found a calling. What a miracle. At the same time I found this calling, I also find myself feeling completely and utterly powerless by events happening in our world. 1 year ago, when I started this adventure, life looked very different. While I have found this calling, I'm also discovering what true community means by finding the incredible people that I'm interviewing. I've loved all the episodes on COVID-19 I put out, and I have, through the process of finding these people, realized that I have a gravitational pull towards truth tellers. And in the last few months, scientists and activists have given me the information that's kept me moving forward so I don't plunge into the depths of despair. In thinking about what I wanted Season 2 to look like, I'm looking forward at what will happen in our world during the next 2 months with the 2020 presidential election kicking into high gear. This will be a global event, and my contribution to it will be to continue finding smart people who tell the truth to help guide us. And that is my next guest, American author, and in my opinion, true patriot, Martha Brockenbrough. 2 years ago, Martha moved me with her words at a writing class where she was a guest speaker. She spoke about the great responsibility of writers to distill complicated information to children because we owe kids the truth. This was a kids' literature class I was taking. She had just released her biography of President Trump, titled Unprecedented, which she wrote in part to let future voters know the truth about the candidate we'd be up against in 2020. The unique thing about her book is that it's written as a young adult biography. Her mission to educate kids is real. Her hope at that time was that voters who turned 18 this year would have the facts upon which to base their voting decision. So now here we are. The time has come. Martha has been on my aspirational guest list since I started my podcast. And a month ago, she posted on Twitter that she was waiving her Skype fees for any teacher that wanted her to speak to their class about Trump. I capitalized on her generosity, and much to my surprise, she agreed to talk to me. As much as I say that I want to provide a platform and a non-judgmental place to tell stories, where I draw the line is at racism, at leadership who actively attempts to harm the American public, and who lies to us at every turn. I promise that this podcast won't turn into a political rant, but I will admit that for the near term, the only thing that I feel like I can really do as an American is try to shed some light on the candidates we're considering to lead our country through the rest of a pandemic. That's the truth. And here's Martha Brockenbrough to help us make sense of it and to help us figure out how to move forward. I would like to introduce American author Martha Brockenbrough. She is the author. Well, what we are talking about today is her tremendously researched book, Unprecedented, a biography of Donald Trump. But Martha, you are many things. The first of which was very intimidating. Writing an email to the founder of National Grammar Day is a lot of pressure. And I didn't realize that until after I'd emailed you the first time. And I was like, oh my God, I misused several commas. I added extra things in. So embarrassing.
I didn't notice if you did that. I don't know whether that's true. And it's funny because you're not the first person who said that I'm intimidating on that score. If you were to look at my Twitter feed, you would notice all sorts of errors and typos, some of which we can thank autocorrect for.
I would blame most of those on autocorrect because I do follow you on Twitter and I've never noticed a typo.
Oh, there are plenty. And I always notice them. I'm like, oh, shoot. But it is what it is. National Grammar Day was my attempt. This is a way back thing. Do you want to hear about the founding?
I totally do, yes.
Okay. So at the time, I was teaching high schoolers, and I was also writing a column for Encarta, which was an online encyclopedia that started before Wikipedia, but then, the Wikipedia model sort of took over. Anyway,
I used it. I remember it.
It's back in the day. And so one thing that I noticed in two fronts. Whenever I would write about grammar and language for Encarta, people loved it. And I'm talking like I would get thousands and thousands of emails, which is always exciting for a writer. And I never would have expected that grammar would be the thing. So there was that. And then I noticed some of my students were having troubles with, where the apostrophe goes. I can remember one debate with one of the yearbook editors, and she insisted it was the BOY apostrophe S baseball team. And so I had to persuade her gently that it wasn't. And here's the thing, no one wants to be that teacher who's running around laughing maniacally with a red pen and being a nag and being a scold. And so I founded the Society for the Promotion of Good Grammar so that anonymous letters that were funny could be written to people who had made errors in grammar. And most of them were my students. And so it was
That's really funny.
it was my job to correct them. Well, it was that, I wanted to have a secret society. This was actually the same time that George Bush and Al Gore were running against each other for president. And both of them had been in a secret society. And so I had researched secret society. So I wanted to have my own secret society. And I also wanted us to have lunch boxes because I had heard that the actor Christopher Guest threw a party and his party favor was remains of the day lunch boxes, which struck me as being absurdly funny. And so now you sort of know how my life and my mind works. If things are useful to me, things amuse me, and then I try to combine them and make something new out of all of them. And so I started this blog, and I eventually had, before my email service changed its pay structure and made it unaffordable for me, I had more than 15,000 members.
Wow.
And this at the time was more members than the Tea Party had when it was getting front page coverage in the New York Times. And so you look at how disproportionate coverage, we could have had a nation that loved grammar. Instead, we had a nation that followed Tea Party principles. Anywho, so I had these lunch boxes, I had membership cards, I sold a book, and it was just all because it was fun and it was amusing for me, and I got to read lots about language and understand why English is so tricky. One of the things that I've really come to understand since I founded it and since I started it is that it's also used as a bit of a class cudgel, and people mock immigrants for their language, and I am not down with this. I do think it's true that when you are able to write and speak in ways that show your understanding of conventions, it's kind of, I don't know, it's like knowing that you don't wear a Speedo to the mall or to church. You tend to get farther in life. But I also think it's worth examining, why we have these biases and who is being hurt by them and how we can get to my higher purpose, which is that when we are able to say what we mean, and when we are able to understand what other people are saying and what they mean by it, that we can understand each other better. And I think that is what written and spoken language can really do for us. And that's why I'm all for loving it and studying it and becoming as good as you can and as full of grace as you can, knowing that language is very difficult. English is a devil. So many irregular spellings and conjugations that it's tricky.
As I've had my 5-year-old at home, you forget when you are a literate adult how tricky things really are and why the GH is silent and all of that. It's very tricky. And you kind of forget, you're like, well, my son just asked me what cosmetic meant. And I kind of thought about it. I'm in the front seat of the car and I'm like, well, it means a lot of different things. So we went through kind of each one and you're like, wow, that's really complicated. That was a longer answer than I had anticipated.
Yes. But I'm so glad you were having that conversation. That's great. And yay to your son for being curious.
That he is. I will tell you that. But what you just said about the language being able to really understand each other is something that you said to the writing class I was in 2 years ago when you were a guest. And why I started following you on Twitter was because of the things that you said about the English language as you were sort of inspiring our class. It was a kidlit class at that time, but you had, I believe, just published Unprecedented, or it was shortly after it had come out because I bought the book for myself and for my 13-year-old niece. Well, I think she was 12 at the time, because I had thought it was so important. And I was thoroughly taken with the way that you had spoken about the English language and the power of words in a way that I had never really thought about it before. And so I think, hearing your conversation in class and really being present for it is a big part of the reason why I decided to start this podcast, and one reason why I really, really wanted to have you on it. Because you not only, you kind of write about everything. When you said you find things that amuse you and you're curious about, your list of published works is everywhere. You've written, really successful young adult novels. You've written nonfiction. You've written about Alexander Hamilton. You've written Dinosaur Tooth Fairy. You've written Shark Week books that have been put out by the Discovery Channel. You're kind of an academic, but able to translate ideas in a way that is I think pretty uncommon with authors.
Well, thank you. I don't know, like I know of other people who do this sort of work, and I consider myself incredibly lucky to get to what I'm working on right now is another nonfiction book about artificial intelligence. And I'm trying to connect it to all of the other things that I think about. And really, it's just kind of my way of being in the world, is I get to be curious about things, and then I get to talk about them with others who are curious and do my best to make complicated things clear and easy to understand, which is not necessarily simple.
No, not at all. Not at all. And so that said, it has taken me almost a year to read Unprecedented, because every time I open it, I am filled with confusion. I am filled with rage. I feel so many things, and I would like to talk to you about this book. And I find it so fascinating to get into the details, but what I am interested in, from somebody who has studied this subject a lot. I mean, I didn't do a page count. I used more of a measurement. The last quarter inch of the book is your research and your source citing, which is amazing to go through and see how deeply you delved into Donald Trump. I would like to talk about, from your educated opinion, as members of the American public, what do we need to be educated on to be able to transform this confusion into something better?
Okay, well, so let's start by saying, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Unprecedented is.
Please.
It's a biography of Donald Trump. It goes back before he was born to his grandfather's immigration to the United States. His grandpa wanted to dodge the draft in what is now Germany, and so he did, and made quite a bit of money in the United States in real estate deals, many of which were shady.
So shady. Like documented shady,
like him building a building on land owned by somebody else. And anyway, so he did pretty well. He wanted to go back. He got married there. He was reacquainted with a little girl he had grown up with, and she had become a woman in the time since, and was a tall and curvaceous blonde, which I guess is a Trump genetic propensity.
Sure, yeah, it seems like it.
To be attracted to. And Germany wouldn't let him stay. They're like, you dodged the draft, sorry. And he wrote this letter, which I included a translation of in the book, and it is so Trumpian.
That is exactly the adjective.
And so what I set out to do with this book, that goes all the way through the first year and a half of Trump's presidency, is to identify, highlight, put in chronicle order all of the patterns of thinking and behavior that led to Trump and brought him to the White House. And the reason I thought this was important is there's lots and lots of books about Trump. The ones for young readers are few and far between. There's nothing else for readers in this category. And so by young adult, we're really talking kids who are 12 and up. And, intellectually, they're capable of understanding the same level of material that adults are capable of understanding. They just need more context. So there are no other books for young readers that are critical of a sitting president. it's not that I was choosing to be critical, but the patterns of behavior that Trump demonstrated throughout his life. He demonstrated lots of racism, lots of ineptitude and corruption when it came to business. There's these patterns, and they don't reflect well on him, but that's not unfairness on my part.
No,
It's
no, not at all. And actually, I would say that this book is extremely fact-based. I would argue that you could have put a lot more of your opinion in it, but you really don't.
Yeah, and
It's fact, it's not opinion.
Those are facts, and they might create an opinion or an impression, but that's what facts do. It's like when a pathologist is looking at cells under a microscope and, says, these cells right here, these are cancer. That's not the doctor being biased against cancer. That's the doctor saying, I have experience in this, I have background, I have knowledge, and what these cells are is cancerous, and they are in fact dangerous. And so that is not, and nobody needs to say, oh, but the other cells aren't cancer, so you're really not being fair to the slide. When you've got cancerous cells, that's the service that you perform as a physician. And when you have someone with dangerous and harmful beliefs and a long track record of harmful actions, then that's cancer of the body politic. And that's what my book is really about. And I don't say it in such blunt terms. I mean, I'll say it when I'm talking about it, because that's my assessment afterward.
Right.
But, a pathologist isn't saying, oh, cancer is dangerous and deadly. They're just saying this is cancer. And so that was my book. It was really tricky getting it all in chronological order like that. I had a huge spreadsheet.
The detail that you go into is actually shocking. And, I'm a fast reader. I'm an avid reader. I read really quickly. And because of the level of detail in this book, I mean, I have notes kind of scribbled all over it. My son, in fact, was like, why are you writing in your book? Like, can you do that? I'm like, no, yes, you can. But I'm like, this is kind of more a textbook. But I have in my notes several places that you did the youth of America real solid in writing this book because it is so factual. And I don't even think you have to give an opinion, but you bring his tweets into it. You bring his digital life into it, which is how we get information about him.
Absolutely. And it's funny because some people said, oh, it's not like you can use Twitter for research. And actually, you can and you must. I had just finished my biography of Alexander Hamilton. And of course, there was no Twitter then, but he wrote lots and lots of letters and he would sign them with pseudonyms. And those, of course, are a really valuable resource for historians. Twitter is exactly the same today. You mentioned the kids of today that I did a solid for, and I appreciate that. I was also, what I explained to my editors, I said, 20 years from now, when we're looking back on this time and wondering what happened, I want my book to still stand as a reliable and faithful account of the narrative.
Interesting.
It was as factually accurate as I could get it. And I definitely had the long term in mind because these are unprecedented times.
That's another thing that I want to talk about in this book. I have lots of questions, but I kind of don't want to delve back into the first 2 years of his term and get into the nitty gritty. But you say over and over, and I have it, written over and over in my notes, that Trump's record of deception has no presidential precedent. That to me is a really powerful line because I felt like I've asked myself that question many times. Like, was Nixon as bad as this? As, somebody who has documented misleading the American public so many times. The New York Times has a catalog of it. Just in your book, you literally lay out a count of, I think Obama had misled the American public 18 times at the end of his first year.
Oh, no, that's the end of 8 years.
End of 8 years.
So Trump lies more in a single day than Obama did in 8 years.
That's shocking when you say that out loud.
It's really shocking. And I did the math a number of ways. I compared the rates, and at the time of publication, it was like every one lie of Obama's was 1,200 of
That's
Trump's.
that's the statistic I'm thinking.
And it's mind blowing. And yet people can say it this way. They can say all presidents lie. Obama lied too. That is also factually accurate. It makes it seem like they're the same, right? And so this is where you can, using words, create a false equivalence. And that false equivalence, if you say, well, all presidents lie, and that's true, and you can't say that they don't. I mean, like, absolutely, Obama, we can go parse each of his 18 lies and say, oh, but this isn't his fault and blah, blah, blah. But let's just say, he knowingly said fake information 18 times. Okay, so therefore all presidents lie. Perfect, fine. We need to care about it much, much more when the president is a provable and pathological liar. That's where, yes, you absolutely should care more. I mean, it's like caring about stepping on a thumbtack versus a landmine.
Right.
Both will injure your foot. Which injury would you rather sustain? And that's the level that people aren't getting at. We've reduced our discourse to this very superficial, well, all presidents lie and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but let's look at degree.
Right. How bad is it really?
It's really bad. It's really, really bad, the deception and the justification for it, because it makes facts seem unimportant. And they're not. I mean, that's how you have a rational discussion. And it's funny because the copy editing for this book was there was a lot of back and forth, like, is this fair? Is this biased? Is this blah, blah, blah? And one of the things that I claimed that I think we ended up taking out because it wasn't worth the fight for me was that facts are the basis of rational discussion. I would put that back in, because if we're not using factual information, then we are basically, I don't know, sword fighting with pool noodles.
That's a great analogy.
That might be fun, but it's meaningless.
Well,
and
and facts, I mean, so going through the first 2 years of his presidency is shocking. I mean, I'd read the headlines, I'd read the news, the Mueller report is in there, the Steele dossiers, but when you have it laid out in a chronological order, and then what I really, really appreciated is in the back of the book, you have kind of a laid out list with photos of who's who, key policy advisors, people that have left the campaign team, it was really, really helpful to have all of those people kind of laid out, because it is confusing.
And that confusion, by the way, is one of his strategies. He likes to keep his deals confusing so people can't follow him. He likes to create chaos because it's an advantage for him.
So this is a great segue into kind of what I want your factually based opinion on. So in reading this and just in being a living human, I think there's a tendency to think that maybe Trump isn't that smart. Maybe his team's not that smart. I think there is that perception that this person isn't doing this stuff intentionally. What is your answer to that?
Okay. So, you mentioned earlier that I wrote a book about sharks. So I've studied a fair amount about sharks, and I really love them. I think they're fascinating creatures. And they also have this reputation, because of the book Jaws that became the movie Jaws. They have a reputation of being these, maniacal killing machines.
Correct.
When the fact of the matter is that sharks are really well adapted for their environments, and they are an apex predator and are successful there. Sharks are not geniuses, but they're good at doing what they do. So Donald Trump, even though he is afraid of sharks, very much behaves like a shark. There is no evidence that he's academically a genius. There is no evidence from his business record that he's particularly great at it. His performance is at a below average for New York real estate developer. And certainly 6 bankruptcies puts him at the very top of bankruptcies for businesses his size in the past several decades in the United States. There's no evidence that he knows much history or geography.
Correct.
So I
That's
don't
fact.
think
That is fact.
that's all fact, and I can support every bit of it. And I will say he claimed to the New York Times to have graduated first out of his class at the University of Pennsylvania, and that assertion was printed unchecked. I found the graduation program, and it listed who's summa cum laude, who's magna cum laude, who's cum laude. Women were at the very top of that class. He wasn't honored in any way, received no academic honors. So that's just not true. He's not a genius. But like a shark, he's good at what he does, which is BSing people and selling people on what they want to hear. So he's a classic huckster. He also takes retribution against people he believes has wronged him. And so you will suffer if you cross him. That makes people afraid of him. His motivation in any given moment, and this is my theory behind, like, why does he tell so many untruths? He wants to be dominant in the moment. So, think of an animal standing on a pile of delicious bones or whatever it is that it wants to eat, and it's guarding those bones, and it'll do what it takes to hang on to the bones. That's exactly what Trump does. This is why the truth doesn't matter to him. He's just being dominant in the moment, and it's working really well. People cover it, they write about it, they wring their hands, or they cheer him on, and he's governing by spectacle. And it's working for him. It's working for nobody else.
I'm speaking with Martha Brockenbrough, and we're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors. We'll be right back. I am sitting here with John Gruss from Element Mortgage. Talk to me about mortgages.
Yes, crazy. It is an absolutely crazy market out there. If you've been paying attention to anything in the news, you've heard that interest rates are at historically low levels. That is true. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the two major government entities, have reported that the interest rates currently are at the lowest level they have ever seen. So it's definitely an exciting time in the industry right now for us.
So I've owned a house for 16 years and I still don't fully understand the mortgage business.
Not something you do every day. That's okay.
It's not. So tell me a little bit about where you're licensed to do business and who can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. We're actually licensed in 48 states through our parent company, which is American Pacific Mortgage. Our brand, Element Mortgage, we have 4 locations based in Washington, California, Colorado, and Hawaii. So in terms of working directly with us, that's our footprint. But if you're in any of the other 48 states, we have the ability to assist.
So the line that always gets me is whatever you've got, we've got you. Tell me a little bit about the philosophy behind Element Mortgage.
Really, it's about focusing on the consumer and their needs and providing options. You hear about refinancing right now. Well, what does that mean? Should I refinance? I'm already maybe a few years into my loan. Does it make sense? With where interest rates are today, it absolutely is worth it to explore your options. And that's what we provide. We provide an expert element. That's part of our business. We're local, so we know what's going on in the local market area. And again, as you mentioned, the human element. It's a major part of this. Again, you don't buy or refinance a home very often. So it is important to have a team that's behind you that you can trust when going through a major transaction like this.
Thank you so much for your support of Right in Front of My Face.
My pleasure.
And if anybody needs John, his information will be up in the show notes. And how do they get in touch with you, John?
Easy. Give me a call, 206-954-4787, or hit our website, elementmortgage.com. John Gruss, NMLS number 1108421. Element Mortgage is a division of American Pacific Mortgage, NMLS number 1850, equal housing opportunity.
I'm back with Martha Brockenbrough. How did you compartmentalize your emotions as you were writing this book? I found myself asking that a lot because I I know I've said it, but I had to set this book down because I found myself really like it upset me kind of on a molecular level.
It is profoundly upsetting when you have lived your whole life and tried to be honest, decent, diligent, and then you see this guy get to be the president of this nation when there are so many better qualified and, people with much more integrity and without the worrying connections to Russia. It's really maddening, but here's what motivates me. I love the country. I love young people. And I want nothing more than for this nation to live up to its promises of equality and justice for all, of a government that considers the general welfare of its citizens and makes policies based in that, and not policies that give advantage to any small segment. And I believe in telling young people the truth even when it's difficult. Nothing good comes from lying to kids. That's whether we're talking about sexual education and their health and their bodies, whether we're talking about money and what it means and how to earn it, whether we're talking about who the president is. Kids deserve to know the truth about the world, about climate change, about our political system, about US history.
Right.
I don't like the word complexity applying to the history itself. It's actually pretty straightforward. The United States was founded by people who believed in the superiority of white men. It's a white supremacist patriarchal founders. Now, that's not what they said their ideals were, but that's what their behavior was. And so the gap between that is where you find all of the interesting and complex stuff. And, the complexity really comes down to human beings. Is do we do what we say we believe in, or do we do what gives us advantage? And isn't that just the human story all along?
You hope, because I feel the same way. I love this country. I have lived in other places in the world, and I have never felt such a deep question about where I live. And I think the pandemic has really made it a struggle for a lot of people that I think have a really strong patriotism. I think part of the difficulty about researching Trump is that every day something else awful happens.
Oh yeah, that was
every
really
day
hard.
Something awful happens. And so you take, okay, well, we just had, July 4th and that ridiculous, divisive speech at Mount Rushmore, where again, as you point out, he telegraphs who he is and what he is going to do. He sent a very clear message through that speech about what the next 4 months is going to look like in terms of trying to get Americans to hate each other. And so knowing that these fundamental things are now fact, I find myself wondering, okay, what as a 42-year-old suburban mom can I do now? What is my path of action now that I am more educated? In fact, not even an opinion at this point, in fact, to help my country through this.
Well, you're one of the key demographics, suburban moms, white suburban moms. The majority of them voted for Trump the last time around. He's starting to lose support among that group, and I think rightly so, for his divisive and ugly rhetoric. But I think we have to vote. We have to get people registered to vote. We have to call our elected officials, and there's an organization called Moms Rising, and you can sign up for their mailing list, and you can also get on their text bank, and they send you a text. They say, do you want to call your elected official about this issue, and all you do is hit yes, and then they ring it up for you, and it's right there. And we have to have that level of engagement. We have to have the uncomfortable conversations with our families and with our friends. Politics is usually viewed as an unpleasant thing to talk about. And when you think about who that serves, well, that serves the people who have political power. And if you don't
Right.
talk about it, then their power, they can comfortably hold it and not have to think about any sort of inequities and injustices they're complicit with. And so I think we have to normalize talking about politics. Talk about it with your 5-year-old. Talk about it with your niece. I talk about it with my nieces and my nephews. And full disclosure, I come from a family of Trump supporters. Even all of the research and all of the earnest footnoting, there's more than 1,400 footnotes. The paperback will come out with a 20-page edition that has, 80 something
Unbelievable.
footnotes. I cannot persuade them to change their views. And I used to be a newspaper reporter, and I covered certain state elections. I wasn't the politics reporter, but there were too many elections, and so they threw them to the likes of me. And Washington State used to have an auditor named Brian Sontag, and he was a Democrat. And I found him to be extremely credible and careful in what he did, and he found lots of examples of the public trust being abused, taxpayer money being spent illegally, and that's what the auditor does. And they audit all the agencies, and you can write reports about it. Anyway, so he was running again for auditor. He had done the job for about 20 years really well, and the Republicans put up a guy against him who had been, arrested and charged like 22 times for harassment and other crimes. He got 33% of the vote. And that was a really educational thing for me. You've got a really competent public servant with many years of experience and someone who has uncovered millions and millions of dollars of inappropriate spending versus a criminal. The criminal gets 33% of the vote. That's Trump's base. That's people who are going to vote Republican no matter what.
Do you think there's traction in what Trump's saying? Trump's saying now that the silent majority is larger than ever. I have a horrific fear that there's truth in that.
No, I don't believe it at all.
I hope to God not.
The silent majority is a Nixon term. It's incredibly creepy.
It's very creepy.
But there is no evidence of that. And in fact, if you look at polls, and even by the conservative outfit Rasmussen, Trump's approval rating is low and his disapproval rating is very high. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to vote for him, but he's never had so few people behind him. He did not win the popular vote. It came down to like 60,000 ballots. What that means is everyone needs to vote. Now, you know that lots of suppression is going to happen.
Right.
There's great resistance to mail-in balloting, which is really cute when it is done by people who mail in their own ballots, to say it's good enough for me, but it's too good for you.
Right.
That's not a very democratic attitude now, is it?
Not at all.
And I don't mean the party. I mean the principles of democracy, demos, the people ruling. Anyway, so yeah, we got to vote, and we have to talk about it, and we have to continue to say things that make people uncomfortable. And you don't want to say it in a disrespectful way, but you just want to say, I am concerned that the president has lied so many times that he's unfit for office, or I am concerned that Russia paid a bounty for the lives of American service people, and Trump is not only not taking action, but is seeking to advance Russia's political interests. And these things are all documented, and whether folks choose to believe them is one thing, but we can keep saying the facts matter. And eventually, perhaps we can make them matter again.
Again, I'm going to go back to the book for a second. You point out that this behavior is completely new for an American president, which I think is a pretty profound point to keep coming back to. This is completely unprecedented. The American people, I think, well, I can't speak for the American people. I can speak for myself. I find myself confused a lot and looking at this reality and thinking, okay, I really do not know who to believe at this point. But one thing I did not know was that Trump kept a book of Hitler's speeches by his bedside.
He did. And what's interesting about that is he claims that it was given to him by a friend, from Hollywood who is Jewish. The man who gave it to him was not Jewish. And it's that was Trump, like that somehow that makes it okay if a Jewish guy gave it to you.
Right. Doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. Trump has a long pattern of admiring authoritarians. And so it absolutely goes back to Hitler, but we can see it in the present day with his admiration of Vladimir Putin, Turkey's president. Pick a strong man and Trump will have praise for that person. China's president, who, pretty much has made himself president for life, Trump thinks that's a good idea. He would like that. There's lots of reasons he would like that. One of which is that it would shield him from criminal charges. Trump loves authoritarians. Hitler used the phrase Lügenpresse, which means lying press. It's exactly what Trump's doing. Stalin called the press the enemy of the people. That's exactly what Trump calls them. And it is just surreal to be pointing out these things and having so many Americans who identify as patriots shrugging. An authoritarian leader is the antithesis of what the founders intended.
And also the antithesis of what so many of these patriots say that they want. I mean, I have the line written in my notes. How have we been so blind and ultimately so forgiving of this person who continues to go down this path of complete hatred? I saw a little ad that the Lincoln movement put together this morning. Did you see that circulating on Twitter?
The Lincoln Project?
Yes, the Lincoln Project.
I have seen some of their things. I don't know if I saw the most recent. Tell me about it.
They put it out today, and it's basically a PSA saying, here are the people that have helped Trump. Do not forget their names. And then they go through and kind of do a slideshow of all the senators and lawmakers that have kind of paved the way. And it's pretty powerful. But what I am struck by continually is the common denominator of complicity and silence and sort of allowing this individual to continue the path that they're going on. I think all of these people, all of these Republicans who have been silent in this behavior, what is the gain for them really, aside from short-term financial or short-term political?
Well, I think that we cannot underestimate how important those things are in American culture. The more money you have, the more you are valued and the more you are worth. Lots and lots of very rich people who don't know diddly, are viewed as experts because of their wealth. And so we've really confused that. I mean, look at Betsy DeVos, who is the Secretary of Education, and she's never been a teacher in a public school. She's not qualified. What makes her qualified besides her wealth? Nothing. America has an individualistic culture. We romanticize people, as heroes or people who did things on their own. And that means that we're not very good at valuing people who do things for communities. We're terrible at valuing teachers and caregivers. We're absolutely appalling at that. And yet, without those people caring about communities and putting others before their own interests, we would utterly collapse. And so to be a star in America means that you have to care about yourself and be very, very self-interested. And we not only excuse that, we embrace and idealize that. There's not a single person in America who's become a billionaire without being grossly self-centered. And yet, we don't call them that.
That's true.
This is why they do it. And yeah, we can't forget, but what do people do for power? And so really one of the things, and I'm thinking about it a lot with my book about artificial intelligence, which is coming and, which is here, which is coming, which will get more intense and which is going to displace vast amounts of workers, including workers who've traditionally been protected, people who do things with their minds. If computers can do them cheaper and faster, your job is done. And that is coming within 10 to 15 years. And so what we really need to do is totally remake our society in ways where instead of centering capital, instead of making, instead of this winner takes all approach that's viewed as a virtue and as a necessity, is all right, what's best, what's a more utilitarian approach, and what is an approach that is conservative when it comes to human life and the planet. We're not even having that conversation.
No.
We're still, wrestling in the gutter with people who are totally okay with racism and lying. And I don't know how to get us out of there except to engage, to vote, and to continue to assert the importance of a shift in values. And we have to be willing to change the way we do things. I just read this book, about certain things in China. They are willing to take a poor area and totally build a brand new city, the size of Chicago, and create opportunity for people to have jobs and stuff. When's the last time the American government did something like that? We can't even get clean water to people in Flint, Michigan.
That's what I was just going to say. Flint can't even get water.
They can't even get water, which is the basic necessity of life. And we have to restore faith in government again. And we have to not make politics a dirty word. Politics is how we share power and resources. And talking about it is necessary to facilitate the sharing.
It's how you end your book, really, in talking about what sociologists say that a belief in truth is. It's what makes trust in authority possible, is the quote from Timothy Snyder. I have it right here in front of me. Without trust, without respect for journalists or doctors or politicians, a society can't hang together. Nobody trusts anyone, which leaves society open to resentment and propaganda and, of course, to demagogues. And I read that paragraph. It's almost like an emotional experience when you look at it. You're like, oh, my God, this is where we are. I don't know who to believe when I look at CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. I do very much still respect journalists because I think somebody has to be out there telling the truth as they see it. Respected doctors are being publicly second-guessed and thrown to the back burner. And I can't help but think that this is the distillation of all this madness is a complete assault on truth and an assault on the American public's perception of reality. I mean, I feel like you and I are rational people. We are thinkers. We can distill facts. But when I saw that video, Kellyanne Conway calling Joe Biden creepy, I really had a moment where, you know how in movies sometimes they like scratch the record and like make a little vortex? Like that's how I felt when I watched that. I just thought, how did we get here?
Well, you can find video of her saying things like that about Trump before she went to work for him. Kellyanne Conway is an absolute corrupt person who can be paid to say whatever her boss wants her to say, and therefore she should be ignored.
Right.
That's one measure of whether we should listen to someone. And yet that rhetoric is super effective, calling Joe Biden creepy, casting aspersions on his mental acuity, and, rather than stepping back and looking at the record. And honestly, like, you would be better off having a tomato sandwich as president, because that sandwich is not going to do the damage that Trump does. It might not be able to lead particularly well, but honestly, neither is Trump. One of the bits of dogma we have to get over is that government is bad and inefficient. Frankly, there's nothing more inefficient than the wages we pay a CEO. It's terribly inefficient. They would totally do the work for less money. Just give them less. And if everybody started paying CEOs less and started paying workers more, the overall economy would be much better off. But we've got this whole idea that captains of industry know everything and therefore must be grossly overcompensated, while the middle class is bled dry. And, the idea that, government can't possibly be as efficient as industry. Tell me, how is it efficient to fire someone and then still give them millions of dollars in severance? How is that efficient? It's not.
It's not.
It's simply not. You cannot make that argument, and yet we do. And that's because we believe in the dogma about things rather than really studying the data. And people can have different points of view and say, but I look at the data this way. Let's both look at data. Let's both look at the same set and let's discuss it, and let's see if we can find common ground and understand our differences. You cannot do that with dogma. It's just, my article of faith is I'm going to outshout you. And claims like government is inefficient is dogma.
That's really an interesting thought about the beliefs in dogma. I really had not considered that before. That is completely true. And to restore a faith that a government can actually help its people seems virtually impossible at this point.
You're in the presence of dogma when people start throwing around words like tyranny and liberty. And, because those are words meant to stop us in our tracks, because of course tyranny is bad and of course liberty is good. That's what America's all about. And it's like, well, let's peel back the surface and see what's actually happening. And is it tyranny to require masks? Well, if you view making someone do anything as tyranny, sure. And go ahead and drive right through those red lights and right through those stop signs and see how well that works for you. A government function is providing for the general welfare. And that's where things like masks as a public health measure are not, in fact, tyranny. That is part of what we signed up for in a democracy, is we consented to go along with things like that.
Stay tuned for more with author Martha Brockenbrough. We're going to take a quick break to hear from a sponsor. I am so excited to welcome the second sponsor for Right in Front of My Face Season 2, Tracy Erickson from Compass Real Estate. Tracy, there are, I don't know the exact number, but there are a lot of real estate agents in the world. And I would like you to tell people about why they should choose you.
Well, I would say I'm a market expert. I truly do understand what it takes to sell a home for the highest price. And of course, I understand for my buyers what it takes to compete in this crazy Seattle market.
Which is not easy.
No. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm a relationship person. I've worked really hard to build relationships with different agents and other realtors in the Seattle area. And I feel like that goes a really long way when one of my clients is making an offer on, another agent's listing, or they're making an offer on one of my clients' listings. I make it a priority to play nice in the sandbox, and that goes a long way.
I can relate, because my priority in the interviews that I find and the stories that I'm helping tell, I tend to listen more than I talk.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with your philosophy as an agent?
Well, I just think that's a life lesson, but
I'm still learning.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I treat all of my clients like they're friends or family. This just isn't a transaction to me. This is a relationship. And when the transaction ends, our relationship doesn't. For most people, this is the biggest transaction of their life, and they're going to experience every range of emotion, from excited to stressed to happy to sad. And I am there with them every step of the way.
Tracy, I appreciate your philosophy and your outlook and your authenticity. And thank you very much for your support of Right in Front of My Face.
Yeah.
Tell people where they can find you.
Well, my phone number is 206-251-6351. You can also jump onto the Compass website, compass.com, and type my name in, Tracy Erickson, and find me there. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Tracy Erickson Homes.
And I would highly recommend that area because her stories are wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm back with Martha Brockenbrough. I was sitting in my car yesterday watching my kids. They're doing an outdoor little bike camp at a big field by our house. And I was watching them ride their bikes. And I was listening to one of the daily podcasts, which I love, from the New York Times. And I got like an overwhelming feeling of powerlessness. Looking at my kids thinking, you know, what am I doing? I'm questioning everything, every decision I'm making right now. I'm, nervous about this election because I think there's a part of me that just wants off this roller coaster. I just want off. I want off the ride.
It's a pretty bad ride. Did you read that Japanese thing? Because roller coasters are spreading germs, and they have asked guests to please scream inside their hearts.
That is what I was doing in my car yesterday. I was screaming inside my heart. No, so
so true.
I was thinking, now is when I feel like the suburban moms really need to rise up, because now this is something, while, yes, the virus affects our kids. Now we are looking at a generation of kids who are going to be potentially out of school for a year. Their childhood is going to look completely different. And now I feel like is the time where we rise up and say, hey, we deserve better. Every single human being deserves better than this from a government that we all kind of pay into and ascribe to. And I'm thinking, I would march. The problem is I feel like we need two marches, like one from 9 to noon and then another one from 2 to 6, so that we can trade childcare because there's nobody to watch the kids.
I was just going to say, after snack and nap time.
Exactly.
A lot of times we think that if we can control stuff, then therefore we have power. And control is an illusion. We can influence things. We can certainly influence our likelihood of not getting in a car accident by not being drunk and not being on the phone and by obeying speed limits and all of that. But we still can't control it because you know what? Somebody else might crash into us. We can influence our health by eating right and exercising, but even some people who do still get cancer. All we have is influence. We don't have control. And I think when you remind yourself of that you feel better and say, okay, well, what can I influence today? Who can I talk to about these things? I can't control their reaction or their response, but I can still attempt to influence them. And so, yes, suburban moms, rise up. Our kids deserve better. My kids are a little older than yours. They're in high school and one is in college. And, I remember what it was like and how hard it was. And frankly, how much unpaid and unacknowledged work we do, keeping our schools supplied with dry erase markers and sanitizing wipes and nose tissue, because somebody has decided that those are,
necessities.
Yeah, they're necessary, and yet nobody wants to pay for them.
Right.
And so we are doing all of the necessary work that no one wants to pay for. And guess what? The people who are doing the work really should get to have the say. And how about we insist upon people who respect us people who are competent, people who tell us the truth, people who are not, milking these jobs in the Senate. Mitch McConnell's wife is in the cabinet, and both of them received bailout money from the COVID bailout. They're multimillionaires. Like, seriously, those people don't respect you for running the school bake sale. They think you're a sucker. And those are exactly the kind of people who need to lose the positions of power and trust that we have given them, so that we can then have a world run by people who actually do know a thing or two and have been putting in the labor. Run for office. You're doing this podcast, run for office too.
That's really terrifying, Martha.
Is it though? Why is it terrifying? Because you might lose?
No, I think that I might win. I think honestly, a part of the reason why people like me don't run is for fear of being raked over the coals, or God forbid somebody has made a mistake in their past or taken drugs. I think there's a very real fear of having all that dredged up.
Look at how far shamelessness has gotten Donald Trump. Wouldn't it be nice if someone would get equally far who's a decent and hardworking human being?
It would be incredible. It would be absolutely incredible if somebody could get to that level, and especially a female, and be taken seriously.
And, people keep saying, oh, is America ready for a woman president? And like, the act of asking that question is one of the things that's getting in the way. Stop asking that. Of course we're ready. It's just asinine. Suburban women run for office. Urban women run for office. You have my vote. I will campaign for you. And
me too.
It's like, think of all the stuff that we have learned and that we know how to do because we have been people in the world doing the work rather than people in the world telling others what to do. And I am all in favor of the kind of expertise that comes from dealing with the nitty-gritty.
I think it's absent from the current political conversation. I truly do. I look at some of the leadership now and I just think there's no one here that has driven themselves to work in a very long time or done their own grocery shopping or, anything real.
Or cooked meals or, dealt with the kid who's throwing up on the day that you have a big project due. I mean, it's one of the reasons women tend to be so exceptional and also tend to have so few opportunities is because we are doing all of this unpaid labor. It makes us exceptional and also robs us from time for things that would get us that American individual glory. It's the ultimate being a caregiver. And I'm not just talking about people who have children because, you're not required to, and it doesn't make you a better person. But lots and lots of people who don't have children are being caring and loving toward communities. And that's just work that's not valued, and it should be.
Well, I feel like you're sort of taking care of all of our kids in the work that you do. I got so much out of your book and so much out of your thorough research. It woke me up to a huge degree, and I appreciate it so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing in helping our kids see a bigger world around them. And, hopefully parents will pick up these books too.
I hope so. Unprecedented is going to come out in paperback in September. And so that will be a new opportunity to get a slightly more affordable version, and also one that is updated through the COVID crisis.
I did, when I finished it, I thought, well, this is just a teaser because it hasn't even, there's a lot that hasn't been touched on in the book, but it's an incredible resource and an incredible read. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to go through this with me. And I didn't even ask you about Jared Kushner at all. And I have so many questions, but I restrained myself.
Like, what's happening to Jared? I know.
I wrote over and over in the margins, like, I don't think he really understood what he was doing when he met with Russia. I swear to God, I think he and Don Jr. just thought they were taking a meeting. Do you really think they knew that it was treason?
No, I don't think they knew. I think that they're so dumb that they don't.
That is totally how I think. I think they're so stupid. They were like, sure, I'd love some information on Hillary Clinton.
Yep. And that was actually one of the things that the Mueller report kind of said in diplomatic terms, is that, Don Jr. didn't know, but they knew enough to lie about it.
Right.
And
that's just a gut instinct. Like, we probably shouldn't have taken that.
Let's just lie. And anyway, it's super fascinating, but like, would you buy a hugely expensive property if the address was 666 Wall Street? I mean, that's just so on brand for
honest to God,
Jared Kushner. Anyway, but I was very happy to do this podcast, and I wish you luck, and am whispering once more, run for office.
Noted. I'd never thought about it before. Stranger things have happened. Have happened. I need my kids back in school. That's for sure.
True enough. Although you could employ them. Think of how educational it would be to have them running your campaign. And
to be honest, I would trust my son with that. He's got real good instincts. He's pretty smart. He's a pretty smart little cookie. My daughter is, she's extremely diplomatic. It might not be bad.
Hey, give it a try. Right?
So maybe you won't see me on the next ballot. I'm not kidding that I need my kids to be back in school, but you will see me texting on behalf of Move On. You'll see me doing what I can for moms demand action. You will not see me sitting this election out and hoping for the best, because I don't want to have to face my kids and tell them that I didn't fight for what I believe is right. So many of us are inclined to not get involved, and look where that's gotten us. My call to action is to join one text list, sign one petition, do one thing that you wouldn't normally do if you feel like you'd like to see change. And incidentally, after the taping of this interview, Martha also just published a new children's book called This Old Dog, and you should go to any local bookseller and buy it immediately. We all need a lesson in how to slow down, and this book is a beautiful reminder on why that's important. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your continued support, and welcome to Season 2. You can find me on Twitter at In Front of My Face, on Instagram at Right in Front of My Face, and on Facebook at Right in Front of My Face. If you like what you hear, please share it. I'm relying on you to help these podcasts find the ears that they're supposed to, and I cannot do it without you.